Imagine being the one who always gave, always sacrificed, and then, one day, your own daughter tells you you're too much of a problem for her family. It's the moment you realize everything you've done for others has left you empty, and it's time to walk away. What happens next? I sold everything I was going to leave her, bought a private villa in the tropics, and disappeared. This is the story of how I chose me over everything else. Trust me, you won't want to miss this. This is the story of self-discovery, heartbreak, and the courage to finally put yourself first. Stay tuned. Hit subscribe to follow my journey of reclaiming my life and finding freedom. You're not going to want to miss what's coming next. I'm Eleanor, a mother, a wife, a caregiver, a woman who spent her life giving everything to others. For over 30 years, I was the one who kept the family together. I was the one who cooked the meals, washed the laundry, stayed up late to help with homework, and sacrificed my own dreams and desires to make sure everyone else was taken care of. I gave so much of myself that I forgot who I was for a long time. But what happens when you've given everything and there's nothing left to give? When the people you've poured your heart into, the ones you do anything for, suddenly tell you that you're too much of a burden? That was the day everything changed. The day I realized my love and sacrifice meant nothing anymore. It started like any other Sunday. My daughter, Julia, came over to visit. She's in her 30s now, with a family of her own. We hadn't spoken in a while, but I tried to tell myself that was just because of her busy life. I missed her. I missed the days when she was small and would run to me with her arms wide, just needing me. I missed feeling needed, missed the days when I was everything to her. But that Sunday, I saw her differently. Her eyes were distant, avoiding mine, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, fiddling with her phone as I prepared lunch. The silence between us was thick, uncomfortable. And then, she said it. "Mom, I think it's time we have an honest conversation." Her voice sounded tired, as if she had rehearsed the words. I had no idea what was coming. I looked up from the stove, trying to smile, but my hands trembled slightly. "Honestly?" I asked. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" She sighed and placed her phone down. "You've been a problem for a while now, Mom. You're just too much. Too much for me, for my family. You don't seem to understand how hard it is for us to keep up with your needs. You ask too many questions, and you expect too much attention. It's like you don't see how overwhelming it is." I froze. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. Too much? I was too much. I stood there, in that quiet kitchen, my heart sinking into the pit of my stomach. The woman who had spent decades giving her all to her daughter, the woman who had always been there for her, was now being told she was too much. I swallowed hard, trying to breathe, trying to process the words. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit for a long time. Julia wasn't the same little girl anymore, the one who clung to me and needed me to guide her through life. She had grown up, and somewhere along the way, she had forgotten how to love me in the way I needed to be loved. I didn't know you felt that way," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady, though it was cracking at the edges. "I never wanted to be a burden. I just wanted to be close to you, to be a part of your life." She looked down at the table, avoiding my gaze. "I know, Mom. I know you meant well, but it's just too much. I have my own family, my own responsibilities now. I can't take care of you like this anymore. It's draining." The words stung deeper than I ever thought they could. It's draining. The woman who had raised her, who had loved her unconditionally, was now the one who was draining her. The silence that followed felt like a suffocating weight, and I couldn't breathe. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. I was choking on the realization that everything I had done for my family, everything I had built for us, had now been reduced to nothing more than a problem. The woman who had given up her own identity for decades had no place left in her daughter's life. I stepped back, my mind racing, my heart breaking. Julia didn't notice. She was already looking at her phone again, scrolling through messages like nothing had happened. She had already moved on, but I couldn't. I couldn't just sit there and pretend like everything was fine. I felt the tears welling up, but I blinked them away quickly, unwilling to let her see how much her words had torn me apart. In that moment, I knew something inside me had broken, something I couldn't fix. I wasn't sure what I had expected from Julia, but it wasn't this. I had hoped that as a mother, I had earned a place in her life, earned the right to be loved and cared for in my later years. But now, all I felt was the sting of rejection. I had never imagined that I would hear those words from her, the words that told me I was no longer wanted, no longer needed. And as I stood in that kitchen, trying to hold myself together, I knew that I couldn't just continue living in this way. I couldn't keep giving everything and getting nothing in return. It was time for me to walk away. And I would. But not in the way Julia thought. This time, it was my turn to take control of my life. No longer bound by the role of the mother who was always there, always giving, always sacrificing. This time, I would walk away, and I would do it for me. I didn't know what came next, but I knew I couldn't stay. I couldn't stay in the house that was once a home. I couldn't stay in a life that no longer had a place for me. So I did the only thing I could do. I walked away. The drive after Julia left was silent, eerily so. I had been so used to the noise of family life, the sound of footsteps, voices calling my name, the laughter and chatter that once filled every corner of this house. But now, the silence felt oppressive, like an uninvited guest I couldn't escape. I had spent years tending to everyone else's needs, always trying to make the house a home, always making sure there was warmth, love, and care for those I held dear. But now, the house was just a shell, empty and hollow, no longer a reflection of the life I had worked so hard to build. I drove aimlessly for a while, not knowing where I was going or what I was supposed to do next. The weight of Julia's words, her dismissal of me, still hung heavily in the air. Too much of a problem. The phrase played in my mind like a cruel refrain. I couldn't understand how it had come to this. Was I really that much of a burden? Had I really become so invisible to her? I had never expected this from my daughter. I thought that after all the years of raising her, guiding her, putting my dreams on hold for hers, she would understand. I thought she would see the sacrifices I made and appreciate them. But instead, I was the problem. The person who was now too much to bear. I pulled over by a small lake, staring out at the still water. The quiet ripples mirrored the calm that had settled over me, almost like my emotions were too numb to feel anything. I sat there for a long time, just thinking. I was supposed to be strong. I was supposed to hold it together, to be the pillar of strength for everyone else. But in that moment, I realized something. I had spent so many years building my identity around others, around my family, that I had completely forgotten who I was. I had spent so much time being the giver, the caretaker, that I had lost touch with myself. I wiped a tear away, something I hadn't allowed myself to do in years, and let out a shaky breath. Enough. I had always thought I would leave my house, the house I had poured my heart into, to Julia. It had been the plan from the moment I bought it, the place where we raised our family. I had imagined handing it over to her, seeing her raise her own children there, creating memories of her own. But now I could feel the weight of the house around me, like the walls themselves were pressing in, suffocating me. I didn't want her to have it, not like this, not after everything she had said to me. I had spent so many years waiting for a love that was unconditional, a love that would be returned in kind. But now, I understood that I had been looking for something that didn't exist in the way I had imagined. Julia had her own life, her own family, and somewhere along the way, I had stopped being a part of that. I had allowed myself to become an afterthought. I wasn't going to stay in this house any longer. It was clear to me now. It was no longer a place of warmth and family. It was just a building, a place filled with echoes of a past that no longer served me. I drove back home, the decision weighing heavily on my heart, but also bringing a strange sense of clarity. The house would be sold. The life I had known was over, but I would not stay in the ashes of it. I would start fresh. I immediately began the process of listing the house. I called a realtor the next morning. The feeling of signing the papers was almost surreal. I had lived in that house for over 20 years, yet the decision to sell was both terrifying and liberating. This wasn't just about getting rid of property. It was about walking away from the past, from the identity I had clung to for so long. I didn't want to be defined by my sacrifices anymore. I didn't want to be remembered as the mother who gave everything, only to be discarded. Once the house was listed, I started looking for something else, something for me. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I knew I needed to be somewhere far away, somewhere I could breathe again, a private place, somewhere I could finally stop being the problem and start being me again. I wanted a fresh start, and for the first time in years, I felt like I deserved it. It was time to buy the house I had always dreamed of, a place where I could leave everything behind, including the people who had made me feel like I was nothing more than a burden. A place where I could finally be free to be myself, without the weight of expectations or resentment. A place where I could heal. I began to search for villas in the tropics, somewhere quiet and remote. I imagined waking up every morning to the sound of the ocean, surrounded by beauty, peace, and solitude. It felt like the perfect escape, and it was something I could do just for me. No one else would have a say in it. No one could tell me what I should do. I was no longer the mother who was expected to give, the wife who had been overlooked, the grandmother who had been left behind. I was Eleanor, the woman who was finally choosing herself. Within a few weeks, I found it. A beautiful villa overlooking the ocean, secluded, serene, and everything I had imagined. I made the offer without hesitation. The moment the papers were signed, I felt a weight lift from my chest. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own life. The sale of the house, my old life, was final. It was time to move on. I packed my things, only the essentials, and left the rest behind. I wasn't going to cling to a past that had already moved on without me. I was ready for the next chapter of my life. And nothing, not Julia's harsh words, not the memories of my old life, was going to stand in my way. I boarded the plane to my new home, my heart beating a little faster with each passing moment. It was a terrifying, exhilarating feeling. But I was no longer afraid. I was finally free. The plane touched down in the tropics, and the first breath of warm, humid air hit my skin like a revelation. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of freedom I couldn't even name before. The world outside was bright, full of color, lush greenery, sparkling blue waters, and a sky so wide it felt like I could finally breathe. I was no longer bound by the suffocating walls of my old life, by the roles I had played, or the expectations I had lived under for so long. I was free to create something new for myself. My villa was everything I had imagined. It sat at the edge of a cliff with sweeping views of the ocean below. The sound of the waves crashing against the rocks below was soothing, like a lullaby or a promise that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The villa itself was modern, open and airy, glass walls that allowed the sun to flood in. The floors were cool stone, the ceilings high and open. It was the perfect sanctuary, and in a way, it felt like I was giving myself permission to be again, to rediscover who I was when I wasn't serving anyone else's needs. The first few days were a blur. There was so much to do, unpacking, settling in, exploring my new surroundings. But there was also an overwhelming sense of relief. Every time I walked into a room, I felt the weight of my old life lift just a little bit more. No more worrying about what Julia thought or what my old life had been. This was my space, my time. I found joy in the smallest things. The sound of birds singing in the trees as I sat on my terrace with a cup of coffee in the morning. The endless walks along the beach, feeling the sand between my toes, the saltwater breeze in my hair. I had forgotten what it felt like to be at peace. For so long, I had been living in the shadows of other people's lives, being everything for everyone, and now I was just me. And for the first time in years, that was enough. But as much as I tried to bury the past, it still crept in. I wasn't naive enough to think I could escape the emotions that had brought me here. Every now and then, I would think of Julia, her cold words, her lack of understanding, the way she had dismissed me as a burden. The pain of it all would hit me, but then, just as quickly, I would remind myself that this was my choice. I had chosen to walk away, and it wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. I couldn't escape the thoughts, though. I knew Julia would come looking for me eventually. That was inevitable. She would realize that I had walked away for good, and that would leave her with questions. I had raised her to be independent, to build her own life, but now, in her silence, I saw how quickly she had forgotten how to care for me. I had always put her needs first, but she had never returned that favor, not in the way I had hoped, and that was what stung the most. But I wasn't going to chase after her. I wasn't going to fall back into the role of the mother who always fixed everything. I couldn't go back to being the person who was willing to sacrifice myself just to be included, just to be wanted. Not anymore. I had done that for so long, and it had cost me everything. For now, I focused on the life I was building here. I joined a local community of women who had relocated from other places. There were women in my group who had walked away from broken marriages, women who had left toxic friendships behind, women who were rediscovering themselves in ways I hadn't thought possible. They became my new support system, and it was strange at first to open up to people who didn't know my past, who didn't have expectations of who I should be. We spent our days exploring the local markets, hiking through the jungle trails and gathering in each other's homes for quiet dinners and shared stories. These women didn't need me to be anything other than who I was right then. They weren't looking for me to take care of them. They were simply there, and for the first time, I wasn't needed for anything, and that felt like a gift. I took up painting again, something I had loved before life had swept me away. The first canvas was nothing more than a simple abstract of the ocean, its blues and greens filling the space, much like the air around me, open, free, without boundaries. It felt good to express myself again. It felt good to just be. But the nights were harder. The quiet was loud in the dark. The memories of Julia, of my old life, would flood in when I was alone with my thoughts. I missed her, of course. She was my daughter. But I also knew that I couldn't keep living for her. I couldn't keep waiting for her to validate me, to recognize my worth. I had given everything to her for years, but I had to stop waiting for something that would never come. One evening, as I sat on my terrace with a glass of wine watching the sun set over the ocean, I realized something. I wasn't just living in the tropics to escape the pain. I was living here because it was the first place where I had the space to heal, to remember who I was before I was anyone's mother or wife, to remember the woman I had been before I lost myself in the needs of everyone else. And as the sky turned to a dusky pink and the stars began to shine above the waves, I knew this was just the beginning. I had walked away, yes, but I had also walked toward something, a new life, a life that was mine. I wasn't running anymore. I was simply living, and that, in itself, was enough. Weeks passed since I moved into the villa, but the silence of my own making had its own weight. At first, I thought I'd crave the noise, the bustle of daily life, the phone calls, the visits, The expectations that came with being a mother and a grandmother. I expected to feel lonely, empty even, but strangely enough, as each day passed, I began to feel more alive. For the first time, I was not defined by anyone else's needs or demands. It was just me, and that felt like a radical freedom. I had always told myself that I would be strong, that I would never need to rely on others. But there's a difference between being strong and being alone. I learned quickly. There were nights when the quiet pressed down on me like a heavy blanket. It wasn't sadness exactly, but more of an absence, a space that once belonged to the life I had lived, to the family I had created. It was as if the universe was waiting for me to fill it with something new. But the hardest part was still ahead of me, the inevitable confrontation with Julia. The weeks went by without a word from her. I'd convinced myself that maybe she would finally understand my decision, that she would respect my need to walk away. But deep down, I knew better. I knew that she would need closure. She would need to understand why I had left, why I had cut ties so abruptly. The phone call came one afternoon out of nowhere. I had been standing on the terrace, watching the gentle waves crash against the rocks, the sea breeze in my hair, when my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize, but my heart skipped a beat anyway. I knew who it was. It had to be her. I stared at the screen for a moment, unsure of what to do. I didn't want to pick up. I had already made my decision, hadn't I? But then again, there was a part of me that was still holding on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, she would apologize. Maybe she would finally understand how deeply her words had cut me, how alone they had made me feel. I took a deep breath and answered, "Hello?" "Mom." Her voice came through, shaky, distant. "It's me." I felt a knot in my chest tighten. Hearing her voice again brought back everything. The years of love, the moments when I had been everything to her. "Julia," I said softly, unsure of where to start. "What's going on?" There was a long pause before she spoke again. "I don't know how to say this, but I've been thinking about what happened, about you leaving. I never meant for things to go like this." Her voice cracked, and for a second I thought I might hear tears. I remained silent, waiting. Part of me wanted to forgive her right then, to brush the pain aside and go back to the mother-daughter relationship I had once known. But I had come so far, and I knew better now. I couldn't keep being the one to patch things up, to always be the one who made the first move. If she wanted to fix this, she had to meet me halfway. "I know I hurt you, Mom," she continued, "but I don't know what to do anymore. I feel guilty, but I also feel like I can't be everything to everyone. I'm struggling." Her words hung in the air, and I knew this was it. The moment I would have to decide whether to open up or keep the distance I had created for myself. I wanted to say something comforting, something that would ease the tension between us, but I had learned something in my time here. I had learned that my feelings mattered too. "Julia," I began, my voice steady, "I understand that you have your own life now. I know you have your own responsibilities. But what I can't understand is why you didn't see me, why you couldn't see how much I was giving, how much I had sacrificed, and how little I was asking for in return. It hurt, Julia. It hurt more than you'll ever know." She was quiet on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought she might hang up. But she didn't. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't realize what I was doing until it was too late." I closed my eyes, taking in her words. They were the words I had been waiting for, the words I needed to hear. But somehow, they didn't carry the weight I thought they would. There was still an emptiness in them, an emptiness that only came from years of pushing aside my own needs. "I'm not angry with you, Julia," I said finally, my voice softer now. "But I needed to do this for me. I needed to let go. And I know you don't understand that completely, but maybe someday you will." I didn't expect her to understand right away. I didn't expect an immediate change. But for the first time, I felt a sense of peace in my decision. I had done what I needed to do to take care of myself, and that was something I could never regret. "I know, Mom," she replied, and this time there was something different in her voice, something close to acceptance. "I just wish I had understood sooner." "Me too," I said, a quiet sadness filling my words. "But I'm where I need to be now, and I hope, someday, you can be too." There was another long pause, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the weight of what had happened between us begin to lift. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was progress. For the first time, I was able to let go, not just of the past, but of the idea that I could be everything to everyone. I was no longer that woman. "I'll be here when you're ready," I said, and I meant it. She didn't respond, and I didn't expect her to, but I hung up the phone feeling something I hadn't in a long time: hope. It wasn't a happy ending, not yet, but it was the start of something new. A relationship with my daughter that was built on honesty, boundaries, and respect. And that, I realized, was all I needed. I put my phone down, looking out at the ocean that stretched before me. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, and for the first time in a long time, I knew that everything was going to be okay. I had walked away from myself, and now I could finally start healing. The days following that phone call felt like a turning point, a moment where I could finally breathe fully again, without the constant weight of expectation or guilt pressing down on me. Julia's words, though still heavy in my heart, no longer had the power to suffocate me. I had said what I needed to say. I had walked away from the life that no longer served me, and I wasn't about to let her, nor anyone else, take that peace away from me. I spent the next few weeks settling into my new life in the villa, allowing the healing process to unfold at its own pace. The physical distance between myself and my past was becoming less important than the emotional distance I was creating within myself. I wasn't just living in a new place. I was living in a new mindset, one where I could fully embrace my autonomy and the stillness that came with it. Each morning, I woke up to the sound of the ocean. The first light of the day would touch the water like a soft caress, the waves lapping against the shore as if the world were whispering to me, reminding me that I was alive. I would sit on the balcony with my coffee, listening to the birds sing in the trees, the world around me still and peaceful. It was a stark contrast to the chaos I had lived in for so long. There was no rush here, no frantic pace of life demanding my attention. It was just me and nature, reconnecting in a way I hadn't thought was possible. In the afternoons, I began to venture further out, exploring the small town nearby. I would visit the local markets, which were brimming with color and life. I found comfort in the simple act of picking out fresh fruits and vegetables, choosing herbs to season my meals, and haggling with the shopkeepers over prices. The interactions were brief but kind, and I quickly became familiar with the rhythm of this new life. There was a quiet joy in these small moments, something I had lost track of in my old life, where I had always been rushing to do more, to be more. I began spending more time with the women I had met in the community. They had all found their own forms of freedom, whether it was from unhealthy relationships or demanding careers. We would gather for lunch or take walks along the beach, sharing stories about our pasts, our hopes, and what had brought us to this new chapter in life. The camaraderie was healing. It was a reminder that I wasn't alone in this journey. There were others like me, others who had fought for their peace, for their independence, and had won. One afternoon, I was sitting with some of the women at a local cafe when I received a message that stopped me in my tracks. It was from Julia. "Mom, I've been thinking. I know you're still far away, but I miss you. I miss us. I don't know what I'm supposed to say or do, but I know I'm not the person I was when we spoke last. I've been working on myself, too. I hope we can talk again soon. Maybe I can come visit you sometime." I sat there staring at the message, my fingers hovering over the screen. A flood of emotions washed over me: relief, confusion, a tinge of hope, but also an awareness of the distance between us. It wasn't a perfect apology. It wasn't a promise that everything would go back to the way it was, but it was a step in the right direction. The decision on how to respond wasn't easy. Part of me wanted to dive back into the mother-daughter dynamic I had always known, to embrace her and welcome her back into my life with open arms. But another part of me, the part that had fought so hard to find myself again, knew that I couldn't let this be about me sacrificing my peace for her again. If we were to rebuild anything, it had to be on equal terms. It had to be about mutual respect, understanding, and growth. I thought for a moment, then I typed a simple response. Julia, I'm glad to hear from you. I've been doing a lot of thinking too. I'm happy to talk whenever you're ready, but let's take it slow. I'm still finding my way here and I need to keep this peace for myself. I love you. I hit send, and immediately I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I wasn't closing the door completely, but I wasn't rushing to open it wide again either. I had to protect the peace I had finally found in myself. And if that meant taking things slowly, then so be it. I didn't hear from her for a few days, and that was okay. I wasn't holding my breath anymore, waiting for a change. I had come to realize that I couldn't control when or how Julia would understand my choices. I couldn't make her see the years of sacrifice that had built the foundation of my decision. But I could control how I lived now. I could choose my peace. And I had learned that, above all, that was worth more than anything. As the days passed, I let go of the constant questioning, the wondering if I had made the right choice. Because deep down, I knew that this was the life I had chosen for me. The rest could wait. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, painting the sky in colors I could never have imagined, I sat on the beach alone, feeling the cool water lap at my feet. The world felt vast and endless, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. Not just from the responsibilities of motherhood, but from the need to be needed in the way I once thought I had to be. I was enough as I was. For the first time, I realized something deeply important. I didn't need to be everything for everyone. I only needed to be everything for me. And that was more than enough. This was my new beginning. And for the first time, I was truly home. The months passed quickly, each one blending into the next with a rhythm I had never known before. The life I was creating felt full, but not in the way it had once been. It wasn't full of obligations, expectations, or duties. It was full of choice. The choice to wake up when I wanted, to go for long walks in the warm evenings, to linger over meals and savor every bite. I was creating a life that was mine, entirely and irrevocably mine. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that Julia's absence still echoed through the corners of my mind. I had made peace with it, of course, learned to live without her, to not depend on her for my happiness. But part of me couldn't help but wonder if things would ever truly heal between us. Would she ever truly understand why I had to walk away? Would we ever be able to build a relationship that was rooted in respect and equality? And just as I had almost convinced myself that I could let go of those questions, it happened. One afternoon, just as I was finishing a painting of the tropical landscape outside my villa, I received a knock at the door. I stood up from my easel, wiping my hands on the apron I always wore while painting, and made my way to the door. The knock came again, louder this time. My heart skipped. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not from home, but as I opened the door, I froze. There, standing before me, was Julia. Her face was different. Older, maybe. Tired, even. She stood there, hesitant, with her hand clutching her bag as if she wasn't sure whether she should step over the threshold or turn around and leave. "Mom," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "Can we talk?" I stood in silence for a moment, processing the sight of her. It had been so long, and here she was, standing before me in the life I had built for myself. a life she never thought she'd find me living. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but now that it was real, I wasn't sure what to say. I nodded and stepped aside, gesturing for her to come in. She hesitated a second longer, then walked past me, her eyes scanning the room as though she was taking in every detail. The light that poured in through the open windows, the simplicity of the space, the peace that filled it. It was so different from the life we had shared back home, so far removed from the house she had once known. I motioned for her to sit down, but she remained standing for a moment, unsure of where to place herself in this new version of my life. "I know this is unexpected," she said, her voice strained. "I didn't know where else to go." I couldn't help but feel a pang of something. Was it guilt? Sadness? It wasn't anger. It was something deeper, something that had been building since the day she had told me I was too much of a burden. "I wasn't sure what you would say," she continued, her eyes meeting mine for the first time since she had arrived. "I didn't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to see you. I needed to understand what happened, why you left, why you walked away." I took a slow breath, letting the quiet settle around us. I had no idea what I was going to say. I wasn't sure if I was ready to explain it all, to try and make her understand the depth of the pain I had felt. But then I realized maybe it wasn't about explaining at all. Maybe it was about her understanding on her own terms. "Julia," I said, my voice steady but soft, "I didn't leave because I wanted to hurt you. I left because I needed to find a way to live for me. I spent so many years putting my life on hold for you, for your father, for the family, and I realized I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep giving pieces of myself away and getting nothing in return." Her eyes began to well up with tears, and I could see that the words were starting to sink in. I never meant for you to feel that way," she whispered. "I was so wrapped up in my own life, in my own struggles, that I didn't even see what you needed. I took you for granted. I thought you would always be there, and I never stopped to think about how you were feeling." The words I had waited so long to hear, the ones I thought would never come, were finally spilling out. They weren't perfect. They didn't make everything better, but they were real, and that was all I had asked for. Real, honest communication. "I didn't understand," she said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, "how much I was taking from you, how much I was draining you. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." For a moment, we just sat there in silence, the space between us filled with the weight of the years that had passed. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if everything would magically return to the way it had been, if we could go back to the way things once were. But what I did know, what I could feel, was that we had taken the first step toward healing, toward building something new, something more honest. "I don't want you to be sorry, Julia," I said, my voice softer now. "I want you to understand. I want us both to understand that we can't go back. We can only move forward from here. I've walked away from the past, from everything that was holding me back, and now we have the chance to build something new, not just as mother and daughter, but as two people who are willing to meet each other where we are." She nodded, looking up at me, her face full of vulnerability and something else, something I hadn't seen in her for a long time. Hope. "Can we start over?" she asked, her voice filled with uncertainty but also a glimmer of something I hadn't expected, a willingness to try. I smiled softly, a tear slipping down my cheek, and nodded. "Yes, we can start over." And in that moment, I knew that I had finally done something I had never thought possible. I had let go of the past. I had walked away to find myself, and in doing so, I had found the strength to allow the possibility of a new beginning with the one person who had once meant everything to me. We weren't the same people we once were, but maybe that was a good thing. Maybe it was time for both of us to start a new chapter, one where we could finally see each other, not as mother and daughter, but as two women who had both fought their own battles and were finally ready to share their stories. And in that quiet moment, I realized this was what freedom felt like. After Julia left, I sat in the stillness of the villa, trying to process the conversation we had just had. It was strange, almost surreal. Her finally coming here, acknowledging everything that had gone wrong between us, and offering the possibility of something new. But I also knew that this was only the beginning. Words, no matter how heartfelt, couldn't undo the years of emotional distance between us. It wasn't going to be easy to rebuild, but it was a start. It was the kind of start I had longed for, the kind of start I wasn't sure I would ever get. I didn't hear from Julia immediately after that visit, and I didn't expect to. There was no rush, no need to force things. I had made peace with the idea that whatever happened with her would happen when it was meant to. The healing process would take time, more time for both of us. But I felt an immense sense of calm, knowing that the door was finally open for us to walk through together when we were ready. In the meantime, I continued to live my life. Every day felt like an opportunity to reclaim pieces of myself I had long forgotten. I spent my mornings painting, letting the colors and the brush strokes bring me back to a time when creativity was all I had. It felt good to lose myself in the art, to see the beauty in the world outside my villa and bring it to life on canvas. The act of painting was both therapeutic and liberating. With every stroke, I was not just creating a piece of art, I was creating a new version of myself. Afternoons were spent exploring the island more deeply. The markets became a regular part of my routine, where I started to form connections with the local vendors, simple casual relationships that didn't require anything from me except my presence. There was something grounding in it. The simplicity of the interactions was like a balm to my soul. They didn't know me as a mother or a wife. They didn't know my past. They only knew me as the woman who enjoyed their fresh produce and greeted them with a smile. That was all. But even as I immersed myself in my new life, I knew there was still work to be done. I was still grappling with the emotional layers of my past, the years I had spent defining myself through my roles as a mother and a wife. The quiet, peaceful life I was building in the tropics was a stark contrast to everything I had known. But it was also a life I had fought for. One day, as I sat on the beach watching the sunset, I realized that it wasn't just Julia I had to heal from. It wasn't just the years of feeling unseen and unappreciated. It was everything. The guilt, the fear of being alone, the self-doubt that had plagued me for so long. These were the things I had to face in order to move forward. I had let go of the idea of being the perfect mother and wife. I had stopped waiting for validation, stopped seeking approval. But now I had to learn how to simply be, to embrace myself fully without needing anyone else to define who I was. I spent the evening walking along the beach, letting the cool water lap at my feet. There was something deeply calming about the ocean, the way it seemed to wash away everything, both physically and emotionally. As I walked, I felt a sense of strength growing inside of me. I wasn't just walking away from my past, I was walking toward a future I had never allowed myself to imagine before. One where I could be completely, unapologetically myself. The weeks that followed felt like a slow unraveling of the person I had been. I wasn't rushing it. It was like the petals of a flower slowly opening up, revealing something beautiful but raw. I started to feel the stirrings of joy again. Simple joy. Not the kind of joy that came from fulfilling a duty, but the kind that came from just being alive, from experiencing the world in its purest form. And then, one morning, I received another message from Julia. This time, it was different. "I've been thinking about what you said," the message started, "about how we need to move forward, not backward. I understand now that I can't keep living in the past either. I know I've hurt you, and I know I have a lot to make up for, but I want to try. I want to try to build something real with you." Not as your daughter, not as someone who needs something from you, but as two people who have both lost and are ready to find something new. The message wasn't perfect. It didn't erase the hurt of the past, but it was real. It was honest. And for the first time in years, I could feel the walls between us begin to crack. I sat with her words for a long time, allowing myself to feel whatever emotions came up. It wasn't easy. I had built a life without her, a life that I was proud of. But that didn't mean I didn't want her in it. It didn't mean I was willing to shut her out completely. No, this was about something different, about being able to accept the reality of what had happened and choosing to move forward in a way that was healthier, more honest, and more balanced. I typed a response, my fingers steady, but my heart full of hope. I'm glad you're thinking about these things. I want to try too, Julia. But it has to be different this time. We both need to be who we are, not who we were. We need to respect each other's space and the new lives we've created. I'm here when you're ready, but let's take it one step at a time. I sent the message, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over me. I wasn't holding my breath. I wasn't rushing the process. But for the first time, I felt ready to allow the possibility of a new kind of relationship to emerge. One that was rooted in mutual respect, understanding, and love, not out of obligation or guilt. As I set the phone down, I looked out at the horizon. The sky was painted with shades of pink and orange, the ocean stretching endlessly before me. This was my new life, my new beginning. It was mine to shape, mine to cherish. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at home in my own skin. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was mine to navigate, and that was enough. I'd walked away from everything to find myself, and now I had begun the long journey toward healing, not just with my daughter, but with myself. And that was the most important part. Because, in the end, I was the one who needed to learn how to love and accept me, first and foremost. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, I smiled, knowing that I was finally free. It was early morning when I heard the knock at the door, a gentle, hesitant tap that echoed softly through the stillness of my villa. I had been awake for hours, watching the sun rise over the ocean, and I knew that today was different. Something in the air felt heavier, more significant, like the world itself was holding its breath. I stood slowly, smoothing the fabric of my dress, and walked toward the door. When I opened it, I was met with the familiar face of Julia. This time, there was no hesitation in her stance. She wasn't standing in the doorway anymore, unsure whether to come in or leave. She was standing tall, with eyes that were filled with something I hadn't seen before. Clarity, vulnerability, and for the first time, a willingness to move forward. She was no longer the daughter who had spoken words that cut me so deeply. She was a woman, standing at the threshold of a new beginning, and so was I. "Mom," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Can we talk?" I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. This time, there was no need to say anything right away. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was an invitation, a space where both of us could just be. The past few months had changed us both, but I could feel it in the air now. We were both ready to build something new. We sat down at the table, the same one where so many meals had been shared in the past. But now, everything felt different. The air was lighter. The space was ours to fill, not with old patterns or unresolved tension, but with new memories, new understanding. Julia spoke first. "I've thought a lot about what you said, about the importance of moving forward. I didn't realize how much I was holding on to, how much I was still stuck in old ways of thinking. I'm sorry, Mom, for everything I didn't see, for how I made you feel like you weren't enough." Her voice cracked, but there was no anger in it, only a kind of rawness I hadn't expected. The apology wasn't perfect. It wasn't wrapped in the neat package I had once imagined, but it was genuine. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something I hadn't dared to hope for: healing. I've done a lot of growing, she continued, her hands folded tightly on the table, and I realized that I can't keep living as if you're always going to be there to make things okay. I can't keep relying on you the way I did. I have to take responsibility for myself and for how I treated you. I could feel the weight of her words, but I wasn't ready to say much. I didn't need to say much. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was comfortable. We were two people finally willing to see each other, to acknowledge the pain we had caused each other, but also to move beyond it. I've done a lot of growing too, I finally said, my voice low, but I also had to walk away to see things clearly. I've spent so much of my life pouring myself into other people, but I never gave myself permission to live for me. I had to learn how to love myself, Julia. Not just as your mother, not just as someone who gives, but as a woman who deserves to be loved for who she is, on her own. Her eyes softened as she looked at me, and I could see it in her face. She was hearing me, truly hearing me, for the first time in a long while. I want to build something with you, I said softly, but I need to do it on different terms. We both do. We can't go back to what we were. We need to start fresh, not just as mother and daughter, but as two people who respect each other for who we are now. Julia nodded, and for the first time there was no tension in her posture. She wasn't the daughter who had been frustrated with me. She was simply Julia, a woman who was ready to face the truth of her own life and the life we could share moving forward. I'm willing to do that, she said, her voice steady now, full of sincerity. I'm willing to meet you where you are. I just want us to be able to be again, without all the expectations, without all the guilt. The words hung between us for a moment, and in that space I knew we had crossed a threshold. This wasn't about fixing everything at once. It wasn't about pretending that the past hadn't happened, but it was about choosing to move forward, together, on equal ground. It was about allowing ourselves the grace to be human, to make mistakes, and to heal. We spent the next few hours talking, slowly, carefully. We shared stories about our lives since I had left, the ways we had each grown, the ways we had been forced to learn about ourselves in the absence of each other. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was honest, and that felt like a kind of victory in itself. As the evening settled in, I found myself laughing with her, the kind of laughter that was full of warmth and the promise of something new. The sun had long set, the villa now bathed in the soft light of the lamps. I realized how far we had both come, how much space we had both created for ourselves, and how, despite everything, we were both still capable of love. When it was time for her to go, we hugged. It wasn't a grand gesture, no sweeping promises, but it was real. And in that moment, I understood something profound. I had walked away from the past, but in doing so, I had also made room for something new, something beautiful. I had learned to choose myself, and in doing so, I had learned to be open to the possibility of reconciliation. As she left, I stood at the door for a moment, watching her walk down the path leading back to the car. I realized that this chapter, this new chapter of my life, was only just beginning. It wasn't about erasing the pain or pretending that everything was perfect. It was about moving forward with strength, with hope, and with a deep sense of peace. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly alive. This was my story, my choice, my freedom. And no one, not even the past, could take that away from me. I closed the door and stood there for a moment, the sound of the ocean filling the silence around me. I was home. Finally, I was truly home.